What if a single country on Earth was never supposed to hold this many secrets? Not one lost empire, but layers of them, stacked on top of each other like pages in a book nobody finished reading. By the time this journey ends, you'll understand why one nation quietly outshines almost every other place on the planet. And if that sounds like an exaggeration, stick around, because I promise you, the proof gets stranger with every mile. Some countries get lucky enough to hold a single world wonder. Peru simply refused to stop collecting them. Empires rose here in places that shouldn't have supported empires at all. Mountains were reshaped by hands with no iron and no wheels. Entire islands were built to float on water and never sink. Today we're crossing the whole of Peru, one impossible discovery after another, and if any of this earns a subscribe from you along the way, consider it the tax for everything you're about to see. Let's start where almost nobody expects it, in a city that looks, at first, painfully ordinary. Cusco greets you like any other Spanish colonial town, all whitewashed walls and tiled roofs. But that first impression is a trick. Underneath those colonial streets sits the capital of one of history's most powerful empires, the Inca Empire itself. Rather than raze the old city and start fresh, Spanish builders simply laid their new capital directly on top of the original one. More than 500 years later, churches, houses, entire streets still rest on Inca stonework, as if the empire never truly left. Nowhere does that ancient skill show itself more violently than at Sacsayhuaman, the fortress that towers above the city. Some of its blocks weigh over 100 tons, and yet they interlock with a precision that borders on unnatural, no mortar, no iron tools, not even the wheel. In places, the seams between stones are so tight that a single sheet of paper cannot slide between them. It's no wonder these walls have outlasted earthquakes that flattened buildings built centuries afterward. But engineering alone can't explain why one of history's most formidable empires chose to rise from exactly this spot. For that answer, we need to leave the city walls behind entirely. The mountains part, and below them the sacred valley opens like a secret. Carved patiently by the Urubamba River, this valley offered everything an empire could ever need to grow. It wasn't just scenery, it was survival. Living among the Andes forced people to look at mountains differently than anyone else on Earth. Stand at Pisac today, and it seems almost absurd that anyone farmed slopes this brutal. Yet the Incas carved these mountainsides into sweeping stone terraces, manufacturing fertile land where nature had refused to provide any. They didn't wait around for perfect ground. They built it themselves. At Ollantaytambo, that same obsession with purpose is everywhere you look. Terraces fed crops. Storehouses caught cool mountain air to preserve food for lean seasons. Massive walls guarded one of the most vital entry points into the valley. Nothing here was accidental, and that's not even the strangest sight the Incas left standing. Hidden further into the range sits Huacrapucara, a fortress so remote that even now, it's one of the least visited Inca ruins in the country. Perched dramatically above the valleys, silence isn't a side effect here, it's the entire experience. Standing on its cliffs, you start to wonder how many places like this the mountains are still hiding. And that question leads to something even bigger. The Incas built dozens of extraordinary sites across these mountains, so why did only one of them become a wonder recognized across the entire world? For centuries, Machu Picchu stayed completely hidden beneath a blanket of clouds, the one major Inca city the Spanish never managed to find. But what makes it extraordinary isn't only how it was constructed, it's exactly where it was placed. Untouched by conquest, its temples, terraces, and walls survived in a condition almost nowhere else in the empire can match. Sitting nearly 2,500 meters above sea level, wedged onto a narrow ridge between two towering peaks, the entire city seems to defy the possibility of its own existence. Every terrace bends to the shape of the mountain. Every building sits exactly where it should. Instead of forcing the landscape to change, the Incas built around it, blurring the line between architecture and nature until you can barely tell where one ends and the other begins. Even today, historians argue over what this place actually was. A royal retreat? A sacred sanctuary? Something else no one has guessed yet? Maybe that mystery is exactly why people can't look away. And Machu Picchu leaves us with one enormous question that echoes through everything else on this list. How did the Incas read these mountains so fluently? Nearby, Marais looks at first like a giant amphitheater cut straight into the earth. No performance was ever staged here, though. Researchers believe these perfectly nested circular terraces functioned as an ancient agricultural laboratory, each ring sitting at a slightly different elevation, each elevation producing its own microclimate for testing crops. The theory isn't fully settled, but one thing is clear beyond doubt. The Incas weren't merely surviving these mountains. They were studying them. And just past Marais, the mountainside shifts into something completely different. From a distance, the terraces look like flooded rice paddies. They're not. Every single pool here produces salt, fed by a naturally salty spring pouring straight out of the mountain. The Mara salt pans have been worked for centuries, long before the Inca Empire ever existed, and local families still harvest them by hand today. But not even Peru's largest city can escape its own ancient past. Arrive in Lima, and at first it feels like the Andes are finally behind you, replaced by skyscrapers, packed avenues, and nearly a third of the entire country's population. Then, rising without warning from the middle of all that concrete, stands Hocapucalana, a massive adobe pyramid built roughly 1,500 years ago, centuries before the Incas ever existed. The city didn't erase it. The city simply grew up around it. And that still isn't the beginning of the story. More than 5,000 years ago, while workers in Egypt were still stacking the pyramids, another civilization was quietly emerging on Peru's coast. Caral is the oldest known city anywhere in the Americas, proof that Peru's history stretches back far beyond anything the Incas ever built. The story doesn't stop there either. Later, the Chimu kingdom built Chan Chan, the largest adobe city ever constructed and one of the greatest urban centers in the entire pre-Columbian Americas. Powerful kingdoms need powerful borders, and Paramonga Fortress once guarded one of the Chimu kingdom's most critical frontiers before eventually falling under Inca control. Today it stands almost forgotten, passed by without a second glance. Just when Peru seems to have run out of secrets, another lost city appears, this time rising straight out of the clouds. High in Peru's northern cloud forest sits Cuelap, raised by the Chachapoyas people generations before the Incas ever arrived. Walls 20 meters tall enclose more than 400 circular buildings, all clinging to a remote mountaintop few travelers ever reach. Often nicknamed the Machu Picchu of the north, it's astonishing how few people ever make the journey. But Peru thrives on contrast, and a few hundred kilometers away, the landscape transforms entirely into something that looks almost lifeless. Towering dunes stretch straight to the Pacific, one of the rare places on the planet where an enormous desert collides directly with the sea. Yet beneath the cold waters of the Humboldt Current, life explodes in staggering numbers: sea lions, penguins, flamingos, and seabirds crowding the coastline. Even in a landscape this harsh, people still carve their mark into it. Cut into the coastal hills is the mysterious Paracas candelabra, a massive geoglyph whose purpose has never been confirmed. And that wasn't the last time Peru's deserts became a canvas. Further south, the scale becomes almost impossible to comprehend. Hundreds of enormous lines, geometric shapes, and giant figures stretch across the desert floor, invisible from ground level and only fully readable from the sky. The Nazca people carved them nearly 2,000 years ago by clearing away dark surface stones to expose the lighter ground underneath, and the region's bone-dry climate has preserved every line ever since. We know exactly who made them. Why they made them is a different story entirely. Ceremonial pathways? Astronomical markers? Rituals tied to water? No single theory has ever won everyone over. And the Nazca Lines aren't even Peru's strangest desert mystery. More than 6,000 perfectly spaced holes cover an entire hillside in the south, known simply as the Band of Holes, and to this day, no one is certain what they were used for. Somehow, that lack of an answer only makes the site more magnetic. Just when the desert feels completely dead, life reappears out of nowhere. Surrounded by towering dunes, Huacachina is one of the only natural oases left on Earth, a small lagoon shaded by palm trees that has sustained people for generations. Maybe that's the real surprise buried in all of this. Not the mysteries hiding beneath the sand, but the stubborn life refusing to stop growing above it. Wrapped by three enormous volcanoes sits Arequipa, known across Peru as the White City. Its churches, monasteries, and colonial buildings all carved from the same brilliant pale stone. But that story doesn't start inside the city at all. It starts with ancient volcanic eruptions that reshaped this entire region thousands of years before anyone built a single wall. Just outside the city lies the Añashueco quarry, where workers have spent centuries cutting massive blocks of siller, a lightweight volcanic stone formed from compacted ash, strong enough and light enough to have built most of Arequipa. An eruption became the foundation of an entire city, and that's still not all these volcanoes left behind. Hidden higher among the peaks sits Laguna de Salinas, one of Peru's highest salt lakes. As seasonal waters evaporate under the brutal Andean sun, they leave behind a blinding white expanse stretching to the horizon, its minerals carried down from the surrounding volcanoes and slowly sculpted over millions of years. Water has never been easy to come by in these mountains. which is exactly why, at Cumbe Mayo, ancient engineers carved channels straight into solid volcanic rock to guide water across the terrain, centuries before the Inca Empire ever existed. More than 2,000 years later, some of those channels are still carrying water today. But it's what water carved on its own, without any human hands involved, that might be the most staggering feat on this entire list. Colca Canyon is one of the deepest canyons on the planet, in places running more than twice as deep as the Grand Canyon, and yet its depth still isn't the most remarkable part. For centuries, farmers have worked these near vertical slopes, cutting terraces that continue to shape the valley today, while overhead, Andean condors ride the warm currents on wings that stretch more than 3 meters across. Even at this altitude, life found a way to belong here. As if the Andes hadn't already shown enough, they save one final trick for last. Vinicunca barely looks real, almost as though someone painted the mountain by hand. In truth, every stripe of color took millions of years to form, mineral-rich layers of rock lifted, folded, and slowly stripped bare by erosion. In Peru, apparently even the mountains can turn into art. And high above it all sits a lake unlike anything else on the continent. At more than 3,800 meters above sea level, Lake Titicaca is often called the highest navigable lake in the world. But the lake itself isn't even the real wonder here. The people who learn to live on top of it are. The Euros people construct entire islands out of layered totora reeds, homes, boats, and the ground beneath their feet all made from the exact same plant. As the older layers rot away beneath the surface, fresh reeds are constantly added on top, letting these floating islands survive for generations without ever sinking. It might be one of the most unusual ways of life left anywhere on Earth, and Lake Titicaca has always meant far more than shelter. Inca tradition holds that this sacred lake was the birthplace of the very first Inca, who is said to have emerged from its waters to begin building the empire that would eventually stretch across the entire Andes. But even that isn't where Peru's story ends. Deep inside the Amazon lies Iquitos, home to more than 500,000 people and the largest city on Earth that cannot be reached by any road. Every building material, every vehicle, every last supply arrives here by river or by plane. The river isn't just a way of getting around, it's the lifeline the entire city depends on. Beyond its edges, the rainforest stretches out further than the eye can follow, rivers turning into highways, every bend revealing another slice of one of the richest ecosystems left on the planet, most of it still completely unexplored. Empires that vanished, cities older than the pyramids, mountains that behave like paintings, and islands that refuse to sink. This is the answer to the question we started with. Peru never collected one wonder. It collected an entire world of them, and it's still writing new chapters in places no one has mapped yet. If this journey opened your eyes to a country you thought you already understood, tell me which of these places floored you the most in the comments, and stick around for the next adventure, because this was only the beginning.